and policy newsletter, The Unaffiliated. If you want to get the inside scoop on what's happening in Colorado politics, you should subscribe now at coloradosun.com/unaffiliated. And I think we're going to have that link drop right in the chat, so you can click that and sign up really easily. We work really hard to bring you scoops and analysis that you wouldn't be able to find anywhere else. And we're really excited to bring you that every week. The next edition comes out tomorrow morning. So if you sign up tonight, you'll be able to read all about tonight's event and all kinds of great stuff that we have going on in the Capitol and all over the place. Now on to tonight's event. Tonight, joining us is U.S. Senator John Hickenlooper, Colorado Democrat who was elected in 2020. He just completed his first year in Congress after a presidential bid, after spending 2 terms as Colorado's governor. Before that, he was Denver's mayor, and before politics, he was one of the people behind Denver's Wingcoop Brewery downtown. We're going to let Senator Hickenlooper talk for a few minutes about his first year in the Senate, and then I'll ask him some questions. And after that, we will ask the senator questions from you that our viewers submitted. We received a ton of questions, a lot of interest in tonight's event. I can still see there's people still signing on, so it's great to see everybody so interested in what we have to say and what Senator Hickenlooper has to say. Thanks everyone who submitted. We won't be able to get to all of the questions. A lot of them are duplicates, so I'm trying to narrow them down a little bit. You can always submit questions during the event to questions@coloradosun.com, and those will come right to me. And also a quick FYI, we've extended tonight's event by a few minutes because of all of the interest. So I know some people wanted it to be longer, and Senator Hickenlooper, thank you for making that possible. So let me hand it over to you. The floor is yours. Really appreciate you joining us, and excited to hear kind of about your first year in Congress and what you've learned in the Senate.
Great. Well, thanks, Jesse, and good evening, everyone. The first thing I want to start by saying is to thank the Colorado Sun for hosting the event. Certainly when I started on this journey, I wanted to make sure our office was as accessible as possible to Coloradans across the state. Last year, we hosted 4 of our own virtual town halls, visited 32 Colorado towns, but we're always looking for more ways to hear from Coloradans, and well, I guess that's why we're here tonight. It's hard to believe that an entire year has gone by since I was sworn in, but I'm proud of what we've accomplished for Colorado. When we arrived in DC last year, we were in the midst of a public health and economic crisis. Unemployment was high. Millions of kids couldn't go to school. Thousands of small businesses had shuttered. For almost a year, the previous administration had largely ignored the problem. So we prioritized the passage of the American Rescue Plan and a proactive science-based approach to COVID-19. We cut taxes for working families. We boosted vaccine distribution, slapped Connect for Health Colorado insurance premiums almost in half. We secured billions to save restaurants and other businesses in Colorado and across the country. It was a hard time, but we got at it. Americans and small businesses were struggling, and we knew we had to help. We had a real sense of urgency. Colorado still has billions in relief available from the American Rescue Plan. Local governments are investing in economic recovery and housing, mental health. Other projects are going to make an impact for decades to come. Today, the state announced plans to use the American Recovery Plan funding to tackle housing and improve behavioral health services. We're also investing in workforce training, in economic relief. In Congress, we also took immediate action to reinvigorate American science and put the U.S. on sure footing to compete with China. Those efforts culminated in the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. It was originally the Endless Frontier Act. I always like that name better. It's a bill that passed the Senate with 19 Republican votes, and hopefully will become law soon. The bill also has $52 billion emergency appropriation. So money's not just in the bill, it's appropriated for the semiconductor industry, which manufactures the chips that power almost every electronic device we own. And that's important because a third of the inflation we're seeing is tied to bottlenecks in the production of semiconductors, particularly for automobiles. Our bill helps end that bottleneck and in so doing helps us fight inflation. We're also able to bring a lot of Colorado common sense to Washington when the Senate voted to stop Trump's rollback of federal methane regulations. Those pollution limits have been based on the the limits that we pioneered in Colorado back when I was governor. And of course, we also passed the monumental bipartisan infrastructure bill, the biggest investment in our roads, bridges, and rails since the New Deal. It's also, just by the way, the largest climate bill in history. Now, some of those funds have already started flowing to Colorado for everything from removing lead drinking water pipes, removing lead from the drinking water pipes that lead into our houses, as well as rebuilding bridges and improving our rural airports. Today, we announced Colorado is getting $79 million to cap leaking oil and gas wells. That's going to help clean up our environment, dramatically reduce carbon emissions and reduce methane. And at the same time, it's going to be creating jobs that this bill is going to support for years to come. The bipartisan infrastructure bill includes the Recharge Act, which was my first bill to become law, which will make it more affordable to drive electric vehicles as we begin this great transition into a clean energy economy. Perhaps the most important part about that bill, in my opinion, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, is it passed in a bipartisan manner. We were part of a group of, when I got in, it was 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats. In the end, it was 11 and 11, so 22 bipartisan senators who really wrote that legislation. From day one, we set out to try to end the gridlock in Washington and find common sense solutions to the issues facing Coloradans. And to see a bill of that magnitude pass with the support of Democrats and Republicans was special. Of course, it's not enough, especially on climate change. We recognize that it's a big step, but it's not enough. Colorado just saw our most destructive wildfire ever in recorded history, and this in late December. I mean, what happened to fire seasons? I mean, a fire season used to end in September. We've got to act before we're out of time, and I'm sure we'll talk about more this evening. Talk about that more this evening. So that's enough for me. Let's get started.
Thanks so much, Senator. Really appreciate it. And I know I'm drinking filtered Denver water because there might be lead in my pipe. So I'm hopeful that some of that money might go to convenience me. So I know you and I have spoken about this before, and since kind of tonight's event is based around this idea that it's been your first year in the Senate, you famously said, of course, during your presidential campaign or right before it, that, you didn't think you'd be a good senator, that it wasn't a place that you wanted to be. Kind of wonder, were you right? Did you like being a senator? Is it somewhere, that you're happy you landed?
I think one of the things I said was it's a place where good ideas go to die. I love it. I love being here. I love the challenge. I think I can be useful. This is a place where what I hear again and again is people don't communicate with each other. They don't build the relationships that they used to. Back when this used to be called the greatest deliberative body on earth. And if there's one thing that I've worked hard on my whole life, it's building bridges. In the wine coop, we always said there's no margin in having enemies. No matter how unhappy that customer is, we'll do everything we can to make sure that they're heard and they understand that we care about their business. Well, it's the same in the Senate. I've really tried to build bridges with not just Democrats, but Republicans as well, and find issues where we can work together. And I think those are, in some cases, those are muscles that have atrophied, that haven't been used for a long time. And it's going to take a little while to get them back into rhythm. But, I'm optimistic. As difficult as sometimes it feels, I'm an optimist. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. And I think we're making real progress.
I'll just add to some of the viewers tonight that I can see your questions in the Q&A. So if you throw those in there too, that's another way you can always flag questions that we can add on to the end if we have time for them. I remember I covered one session with you as governor, and you were pretty hands-off from the legislative process. And obviously, to be influential in the Senate, you really got to get your hands dirty and make sure you're talking to people. How have you changed your tactic, your political tactic or policy tactic to get your influence in legislation in DC?
Well, it's a completely different job. When you're a mayor or a governor, every day you come to work and you've got 10 fires to put out. and there's emergencies left and right. And within that management challenge, you're also trying to sort through the legislative issues and make sure that the things you think are most important get prioritized. And you're trying to make sure that things that maybe aren't a priority, that they wait their turn. In the Senate here, where I'm one of 100, to me, I think the most important thing is to build the relationships that allow me to be part of that conversation. The fact that I got to be included in that bipartisan group of 20 senators, 20 out of 100, it spoke that at least I felt, at least I told my wife, that it reflected a certain level of confidence that some of the other senators had, because I'd been an entrepreneur, because I'd been a mayor, because I'd been a governor, that I would be able to add value to some of those conversations. And that was the point of running for the Senate in the first place, was to take a lot of that experience that I had at all different levels of government. As a mayor and as a governor, you see a lot of laws that are made in Washington and imposed on your state. And you automatically see things that could have been done differently, and it could have been a much more successful law. Well, I'm trying to bring that experience to Washington and make it, do my part, or do the best I can to try and make the laws better.
I want to move forward and talk a little bit about the Build Back Better Act. Obviously Democrats were unable to advance the bill. They're now looking at moving it forward potentially in smaller pieces. I think there's a lot of consternation, or a lot of, maybe anxiety among supporters of the bill about what's going to be left on the cutting room floor. So I kind of wonder, what you feel like, might not make it into the final version. I know Senator Bennett's really working hard to keep the child tax credit expansion in. What should people be prepared to lose in this next iteration of the bill?
Well, I think, maybe it's a better way to look at it is to look at some of the things that could be in there if we can give it some resuscitation. We need to give it they had an issue of a lack of oxygen for the bill. I think that not only would you get, is the bipartisan infrastructure bill was the largest climate investment that this country's ever made, probably that any country's ever made, and yet Build Back Better will be even larger. You're talking about, enormous investments in tax credits for electric vehicles, for wind energy, for solar energy, investments in continuing to improve the grid and charging stations, some of the stuff we began in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. But there'll also be things like that'll really help our economy get going, like early childhood education and daycare, so that working mothers who, in many cases, and I'm sure you've heard this, I've heard this a number of times in Colorado, with the challenges in the schools, so many mothers, especially with younger kids, the 4-year-old, the 5-year-old, they don't feel they can leave their kids at home, or they don't have anyone to leave their kids with, and they can't afford to pay for childcare. So I think there are a bunch of things that I think could be that there's strong unanimity for, that could be a big part of that bill. We could also see a significant increase in Pell Grants, which helps kids trying to work their way through school, could be a significant part of making academic higher education more academically achievable.
I kind of wonder, we've been talking about this bill for such a long time. You're obviously the optimist, but should voters really expect this to get done in the next couple of months? Is this something that you think is going to take longer? Are we going to get to another point where we have a bill and then it dies at the altar, so to say?
I've been advised many times to restrain my optimism, but I do think it's so important. Again, we're going through the worst pandemic as close as I can tell in world history. This is the damage and the consequences of this pandemic are far worse than what we saw in 1918. And that was then you go back to some of the medieval, plagues. We have to make sure that we keep investing especially in our infrastructure and getting people back to work so that we can get our economy going again. This is like taking, so it's almost like I guess you could say that life is a form of conflict. And what's happening is that people are, they've gotten punched in the face, and now it's not clear. Well, it is clear. If we don't punch back, if we don't keep battling the consequences of COVID-19, we could set back an entire generation. Go back and look at the Great Depression and how hard that was. My mom was born in 1921, so she was a teenager, a kid and a teenager all through the Great Depression, and people just didn't have any hopes. They felt that their life was a dead end, and I think that means that something like Build Back Better, which has real, meaningful benefits for our economy, but at the same time also addresses climate, which is a existential threat to our country and the world. I don't think it's well, I hope we can get it done. I think, at least I feel like I'm going to do everything humanly possible that whatever version we can get done, we get done. I mean, we have two Democratic senators who've been very cautious about what they want to support. Well, we need all 50 Democrats to get anything done. And I think that means that perhaps we don't get everything that everyone wants, but we'll still get a bill.
I guess kind of along that vein, I know you've come out and said that you support changes to the filibuster in order to pass, the voting rights legislation. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I wonder, if you're concerned at all about if changes are made to the filibuster, what that would mean should, Democrats lose the majority in November, and all of a sudden, now Republicans don't have the filibuster to contend with.
I think that well, we'll see. I mean, again, that's a hard. The filibuster is what we have. I personally, I was all for protecting and extending, continuing the filibuster. But again, especially with voting rights, I thought that we should go to a talking filibuster. More like what the old traditional filibuster. If you saw, Mr. What was it? I can't even remember. Mr. D goes to Washington.
Mr. Smith, yes.
Mr. Smith goes to Washington, right? Jimmy Stewart. I mean, that's sort of what most people think, but that's not the way it works here now. And I think that, well, at least in terms of voting, I think that, I mean, the right to vote is the foundation for every other right that we have.
So it sounds like you would maybe be open to some changes to the filibuster for voting rights legislation, but what about for Build Back Better or for other bills? Well,
again, right now that's a mathematical improbability. Again, I would hope with something like Build Back Better, which is so important, that we could get to the Republicans, looking at it fairly. But right now they've been pretty, largely because they don't want to see any kind of the funding, or they're not comfortable with the funding sources. They view in some way it's a tax increase one way or the other. If we could solve that problem, then we wouldn't even have to worry about the filibuster. But again, I would be open to evolving on the filibuster as well if I thought that this was something that we could get done. Again, I think the big issue is not as much the filibuster as it's the people. So that when you look at climate change, there are only so many things you can do to address climate change. And I would hope that Republicans, Democrats would come together and figure out what is the most cost-effective and efficient way that we can address climate change and really do it instead of just kind of talking about it.
Right. I should correct myself, because obviously you can pass the Build Back Better Act through budget reconciliation, which only requires the 50+1 majority. So
no, but I know what you meant. I wasn't holding you to that specific. You were looking at other uh, at other large initiatives.
Right. I just want to look smart here because, as you and I know, lots of people on the internet will make fun of us if we're not. Moving forward, I want to talk about, obviously, the big thing that's before the Senate right now is the question of who to replace Justice Stephen Breyer with. I'm kind of curious, what you're looking for in a new Supreme Court justice. And I would really think that, obviously, a candidate's position on Roe v. Wade would probably be pretty central to your thinking on that.
Well, I've always felt that a government should not get in the middle of decisions that a woman's making concerning her own health. I don't think we want a government to come between a woman and her doctor when she's making sometimes the most important decisions of her life. And I do view that as a civil right, as a protected right in the Constitution. I understand and again, part of what I've tried to do here is talk to some of the more conservative Republican senators and really hear where they're coming from and their experiences in their life and why they feel so strongly the way they do. I think so. Recognizing that Roe versus Wade is the law and has been the foundation and precedent for so many other rulings from the Senate. Even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, no one would ever talk about throwing Roe versus Wade over the side. But I think we don't want to lose. I don't think we want to lose sight of the values that people have, that I think people should have when they're going to, take on, one of the crucial roles as being a Supreme Court justice. I think that their value system, their recognition that we are a country that stands by the rule of law, that our laws are set up to be fair to everyone, not just because you've got a fancy lawyer or more money that you suddenly get, your friends get a benefit, get a break, and don't have to play by the same rules that everybody else has to play by. I think that's when you get in real problems. And I think that is, every bit as important as their stand on, or a candidate, it's every bit as important for that candidate as any particular stand, is that they have that strong sense that we are a country that respects the rule of law and that we have spent a couple centuries building up this legacy of objective judicial decisions that are outside the sphere of politics. And it is frustrating for me, to be honest, and this is before I ever thought I'd come to the Senate, but it has become increasingly partisan. The judicial appointments are suddenly, us versus them, Republicans versus Democrats. It didn't used to be this way. And again, this is one of those things that I would hope at some point we can work our way through.
I guess along those lines, there's been a lot of conversation about whether or not, President Biden's Supreme Court nominee will get bipartisan support. How important do you think it is for that nominee to be able to get that bipartisan support? Is that something that is going to help inform your decision about whether or not to vote for this person?
Well, I think, again, the thing that matters the most is the qualifications and the character of who that candidate is. That's gonna drive me in terms of making that final decision. I think the more bipartisan support you can get on anything in government now, I think that's very important. But I can't, I'm not going to hold up a judicial nominee because we might never get any support from no matter who the candidate is. And I'm sure you remember Merrick Garland in the last year of President Obama's second term. I mean, Merrick Garland, by pretty much everyone's measure, was a independent, nonpartisan oriented candidate who never even got a hearing. And now it's just because the Republican Party just locked down. If that happens again, I think I mean, obviously, if that happens again, we can't wait for them to create a bipartisan solution. We're going to have to get a justice in there so that we can make sure that the court continues to operate.
All right, and I'm going to ask one more question just before we get into what our readers wanted to know. And this is from the politics wonk in me. I'm kind of curious, looking ahead to November, if you're concerned at all, for your party's chances of keeping control of Congress. Obviously, there's been polling that shows President Biden's numbers slipping. Do you think voters are going to punish Democrats for issues like inflation? And how do you message to voters about why it's not the party's fault and what's causing it and what you're going to do to address it?
Well, I think a lot of it, and this is politics. This has been, since the first time I ran for mayor. A lot of elections are decided by things that are, more closely referred to as acts of God rather than political decisions. I think if you look at the components of inflation, I mean, let's be real, inflation is significant. And, I hear about it whenever I'm back. I spent last Wednesday and Thursday driving out to Burlington to the east on the Eastern Plains, almost into Kansas, and then south through Cheyenne Wells, and then down to ended up spending the night in Lamar. Actually, former Governor Roy Romer came with me on this. It was a 2-day trip. We came back, across through Bent County and into Pueblo, and then back up along through Colorado Springs. I mean, that was an amazing trip. Anyway, more on that later. We heard about inflation from a variety of different people and a variety of different consequences. And I mean, it's a serious issue. But if you look at energy, I mean, the cost of oil, which is really controlled by the OPEC plus, is what they call them. But this country, the United States, has been held hostage repeatedly over many years by what this group of oil producing countries that are trying to exercise monopoly control. When they can do that, they raise the prices as high as they can and hold as long. Same thing, the supply chain problem with making sure that we could get automobiles off the assembly line. It wasn't just the chips, but that was the major component of that. All these things added together to create inflation. Now, perhaps there was some impact from the American Recovery Plan, which is a part that President Biden really put into place. We can argue that, but the bottom line is, with COVID still, the next Omicron came and the next wave, people are having a hard time. And when people are having a hard time, they generally they often will vote just in the hopes that somehow things will improve. I mean, that's been part of politics for a long, long time. So again, I feel that things are going to get better. I think Omicron is behind us. You look at the economic results that were recently announced, and we've had the largest economic growth going back to 42 years, I guess it was. I mean, that's good news. But we've got to keep doing that, and we got to make sure that I personally believe that we need to continue to focus on, small businesses and jobs and some of the stuff I've tried to focus on when I was here, and make sure that we get them the support to get through the tail of this pandemic is still going to be nasty. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help those small businesses and large businesses. They have a lot of employees, but make sure that they come out of this with a full head of steam.
All right, let's move on to some reader questions, and thank you to everyone who submitted tonight. I want to start out with one from Jesse Krischer. He asks, despite scientists' warnings about the link between fracking, methane emissions, and climate change, you voted for a GOP amendment designed to prohibit the executive branch from banning fracking. Can you please explain your vote? And as an aside, I will say that Senator Bennett, our other Colorado Democratic senator, also backed this amendment. I believe this was at some point last year, but quite a while ago.
Yeah, this was in what they call Votorama, which is this amazing experience where either the Democrats or Republicans put forward all these amendments to try and divide the other side. Listen, we've got to address climate change in real time. And I've been saying that. I got a master's in Earth and Environmental Science. Jesse, we've talked about this many times. We're out of time. And I have the greatest sense of urgency that you could ever imagine. But banning fracking is such a small part of the solution, and it gets into all kinds of legal issues. What we should be looking at, and I'm doing something every day working on this, is to get to a comprehensive plan by which we can transition into a clean energy economy. And I went to, just for a couple of days, went to Glasgow for the climate talks. And we met with a number of representatives of different countries. The thing I came away from that I found most encouraging was that we have that time, when we passed our methane regulations in 2013 or 2014, I guess they got passed. It was the first set of methane regulations, not just in America, but in the history of the world. And yet methane is 70 to 80 times more harmful to climate than carbon dioxide, than CO2. And when we got those methane regulations done, we thought it was the best thing ever. And then of course, Trump came in and reversed it, because it creates some cost for the oil and gas industry, but very little. Our oil and gas industry, they partnered with us to create the regulations, and they were willing to spend the $60 million a year to make sure that the air was cleaner. I remember the press conference, one of the CEOs said that their employees breathe the same air that the environmental community breathes. But I think the bottom line is that at Glasgow, over 100 countries committed to getting rid of all their fugitive emissions, all their methane, by 2030. We're coming close. That's a transformative moment that no one really picked up on. And I think we can get into lawsuits and fights over fracking and not fracking, and that's going to be in this country. And certainly you're going to drive the price of natural gas up, which people throughout the southern part of this country, the Midwest, that's how they heat their homes in many cases. So they're going to have a much harder time. I think that's all on the side. We should be looking at these big pictures and say, we've seen the greatest reduction in the price of electricity generated by wind and solar in the history of mankind, and in renewable ways. And this, I keep thinking that 50 years from now, we're going to look back on today or this year as that pivot point, a point of transition by which this is when we began going to a clean energy economy. And a big part of that is getting electric vehicles affordable, accessible, making sure that there are charging stations anywhere that someone might need them, and that the cost for the electricity to recharge their batteries is as affordable as it always has been and should be. That's what it's in our grasp. And I think that's the part I try to really focus on, is what's that comprehensive plan whereby we can, get to net carbon zero, not by 2050, but even 2040, if we possibly can, and do it in a cost-effective way, and recognize that as we do this, it's going to create far more jobs than it's going to lose.
A lot of readers wrote into us about what the Senate's going to do with the future of the Voting Rights Act. I know we talked about that in the first section, but this question is from Leslie Murphy. Why can't Democrats pass some form of a slimmed down Voting Rights Act? And then I wanted to add on another reader's question who wanted to know what you're doing to protect our democracy. That reader's really worried about kind of the future of America, I guess.
Sure. And Leslie, I mean, both questions, good questions. So yes, and I've already had a couple of discussions with people about what that kind of a slimmed down version might look like, and how do we go, what's a good strategy to build a bipartisan level of support for that? Because as I said earlier, the right to vote is the right from which all our other rights spring. And I don't know if you got a chance to see, or any of you saw John Ossoff on the evening when we were debating voting rights. I guess it was late afternoon, but he was eloquent about why the Voting Rights Act mattered, not just in Georgia, that he was explicit in Georgia, but why it is such a big deal. And he sits on my left on the Senate floor. You have a desk on the Senate floor. Those desks where you sit are permanent. It's sort of like fifth grade. You get assigned a desk when you first go in, and John Ossoff is on my left, and Mark Kelly, the former astronaut who's a senator from Arizona, is on my right. It's sort of like, it's like fifth grade in that they become the people you spend most of your time with. They become your mates. And Ossoff has spent a huge amount of time on voting rights. He was when he was 15 or 14, I think he was 15, and he wrote a letter to John Lewis, a famous civil rights activist in Georgia, who then became a senator for many, many years and was instrumental in voting rights again and again and again. And John Ossoff wrote him a letter, and the letter had so much time and effort and love in it that John Lewis called him and asked to meet him, and John Ossoff became one of his proteges. Became an intern, and actually, when he went to college in Washington D.C., he went to work for John Lewis. So he has been around some of the smartest voting rights people there are, and again, this is no different than anything in politics. When you don't succeed, you can't just kick the dirt and walk away. You've got to find a better way to do it. It's the same thing as when we were trying to start the brew pub. If you can't raise enough money in one location, you can quit, or you can try and say, all right, well, that just didn't work. I'm not going to give up. And I think that's what we're going to have to do with voting rights. It's one of those essential rights that we've got to fight for, and we'll get it. Again, the stakes are too high for us not to get it. And I also believe, having talked to many, many, many Republicans in Colorado, but in other parts of the country as well, there are a lot of Republicans that don't like what's happening with state legislatures trying to, they're presenting they're setting the stage as if they're going to try and reverse the legal outcomes of elections, or they're going to try and change which votes get counted, which votes don't. Many, this is not just a Republican versus Democratic issue. This is an issue about democracy, and whether in a democracy, you have to ask the question, if more people vote, isn't our democracy stronger? If fewer people vote, then doesn't it make our democracy a little weaker? And I think that's one of those questions, one of those essential questions that makes an essential issue so important, because I don't think there's any question in my mind that you want to get as many people to vote as possible. And especially in Colorado, while I was governor, Amber McReynolds was the clerk, and she worked with Democratic and Republican, probably majority of Republican clerks. And that's how we got our vote by mail and same day registration and, 3 weeks of early voting. I mean, we're in the top 2 or 3 states for turnout, for the number of people, the percentage of our voters who vote. That's because we make it easy. And I think that makes our democracy stronger. My predecessor in the Senate seat, Cory Booker, he won in 2014, which was the first vote by mail, first, wide open, really easy election that we had in Colorado, and a huge turnout. And doesn't help Republicans or Democrats. He beat my friend Mark Udall, who was a great senator, but that was what the people wanted. And making it harder or easier to vote had nothing to do with the outcome. It's just, it's misguided, and we will. So hold me to this. We'll find some way. We won't get all of the things that were in the large voting rights bill that didn't pass, but we will distill down some of those things that we can get bipartisan support on, and we'll build the strongest bill we possibly can.
All right, we've got a couple minutes left. I'm going to see if I can sneak in a couple questions. Let's see if we can go through these quickly. This one's from Tom Seastead. I think I might have missaid his name, but he said he's very frustrated with that he has no voice in influencing Senators Manchin or Sinema. What would you suggest be done by those of us who are in strong opposition to blocking and stonewalling that those two senators are doing?
Well, I mean, Tom, that's a tough question. And I'm very sympathetic. I've had a fair number of discussions in that direction. I guess the first thing I'd say is you don't want to be too hard on Joe Manchin there are two reasons. One is he's the same person he's always been. In other words, he's from a very conservative state. He's been a Democrat his whole life, but he's always been a very conservative, or at least let's say moderate Democrat. And I think that's something to recognize, that if we don't have him as a Democrat, we don't even have 50 votes. So we don't even have a hope for a majority. As Senator Sinema, I don't know as well. I've spent a fair amount of time with Senator Manchin, really trying to understand where he's coming from and what his priorities are, and especially with Build Back Better, what can we do? Because given this pandemic, there are still a lot of parts of the original Build Back Better that would have real value and that we need to really fight for. And again, I think we'll get there. Senator Sinema, I think, again, is genuine, and again, she's 1 to 50 votes. If we didn't have her, we wouldn't even have these discussions. So, in terms of how your voice can be heard in getting through to Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin, they are both pretty set in their ways. And I've seen many senators and the heads of nonprofits, Stacey Abrams. I mean, you go down the list, the President of the United States, they have been very set in their beliefs and what they want to have happen. Not to say they haven't changed. Some of the things they weren't okay with before, they sound like they might be willing to accept now, and vice versa. Some of the things that they had put on a list, now they think that given the nature of the economy now, that they wouldn't support. This is politics, and it's no fun. And I am very sympathetic to not feeling like your voice isn't heard, because sometimes that's how I feel here as well. But you just have to keep working at it, keep sending letters. People do respond to letters.
All right, well, let me ask you one last question. I always like to try to end these things on a positive note. This one should be kind of an easy one for you. Denise Hernandez wants to know, what is it that motivates you the most, or what motivated you the most throughout your first year as a senator from Colorado?
Thank you, Denise. And that's, I'll try and be quick on that, but it is in a funny way, especially when we had the insurrection, when there was, that angry mob stormed the Capitol, and they just wanted to break things and take down the windows. And they felt by getting in there, they were going to convince Vice President Pence to change the election. Well, there's only a few things that are absolutely primal, absolutely essential to democracy. But one is that when you lose an election, you got to be willing to lose. The other thing is you got to renounce violence immediately as it's happening. Before it happens, you've got to renounce violence. Neither of those things President Trump did. And I think that made me, I really felt in a very powerful way, a patriotic urgency to build some relationships in the Senate, to get to know Republicans and Democrats, and find places where we could agree and work. I'm the chair of 2 subcommittees. I'm the first Democratic freshman senator to chair 2 subcommittees in 40 years. And since Max Baucus, the wonderful, great senator from Montana, since he first got elected. Anyway, I think those 2 subcommittees, one is the Space and Science Subcommittee on the Commerce Committee. I mean, space and science, that's essential to Colorado. So I worked so hard planning and working on how we're going to really make America, again, the leader in the world in space and science. And then the other committee is on the Health, Education, and Labor, it's a workplace and employment. And that has a lot to do with, apprenticeships. Noel Ginsburg, I know many of you know Noel Ginsburg. We worked on apprenticeships in Colorado and really had a tremendous template, a model that Noel, I helped Noel create, but Noel really created it. And it's now in 22 different states around the country, either being implemented or studied. And as chair of the Health, Education, and Labor Subcommittee on Employment and Workforce, I get to see how to take the best parts of that and put it into a Build Back Better, which is, what we want to do. So anyway, sorry, I'm talking to my answers weren't as short as they might have been. I'll do better, Jesse, I promise.
That's okay, Senator. We've known each other for quite a while, so I appreciate your thoughtful answers, for spending so much time with us, and thank you again, for staying a little extra to talk to our readers. I know everyone really appreciated it. Again, if you're not a Colorado Sun member, please join us. Help us make more events like this possible. Please sign up for the unaffiliated. You can find a link to that down in the chat. And again, I really can't say thank you enough, Senator, for spending some time with us and sharing your thoughts on all these issues. I'm sure we'll check in soon. And if anyone has any questions, obviously we talk to the Senator's office frequently. Feel free to drop those over at questions@coloradosutton.com. You can email them to questions@coloradosun.com, and we'll try and get them answered for you.
Jesse, if you send them to me, we'll answer them. I mean, definitely. If you get them to Melissa or somebody, and I'll make sure I go over and we'll answer them.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Senator. And thank you. Stay safe out there. Everyone have a great night. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Colorado Sun event.
Thanks, Jesse.